The Supreme Court says the federal government can prevent domestic abusers from having guns. The court also ruled the Second Amendment allows for disarming people who pose a credible threat to the safety of others. Today's decision upholds a 1994 gun safety law that a federal appeals court had struck down. It stemmed from a case involving a Texas man accused of hitting his girlfriend, then threatening to shoot her. Justices ruled 8-1 in the decision. Clarence Thomas was the lone dissent.
One of the topics we want to dive into tonight with WGN political host Paul Lisnek. Paul, good to see you. It's been a busy week, right? Let's start with the violence that has reared its head here in Chicago once again this week. A 7-year-old child, a retired Chicago police officer, and people just going to the beach. When the mayor talks about trying to get to the root causes of violence, it tends to be a long-term solution. What about the immediate impact? The city council just kind of delayed another examination of a curfew.
Well, that's a great, you've covered it, Ray, because essentially when the mayor talks about this, he talks about the youth centers and job programs and a variety of things that over time would be a good thing to do for the city, I'm sure. Different opinions, but nevertheless over time. But it's a long-term operation. What about the short term? What about the things that are going on right now? That's the concern. You're right. Alderman Brian Hopkins pushes the 8 p.m. curfew. Mayor's not for it. That goes off to rules, probably never to be seen again. We'll see. And then other aldermen like David Moore, the 17th Ward, he's out there literally on the streets. He's camping there to try and get a message across. So what you're seeing are individual aldermen who are attempting to say we need to do something now and it needs to address the short term. The mayor probably needs to at least publicly address his efforts towards having things happen on the short term, because right now the sense we get from him is that it's a long-term plan. And summer violence is surging, as we know.
Absolutely. There will be an interesting City Hall meeting next time, I'm sure. Let's go back to politics, local politics.
Sure.
We have a little uproar there on the Republican side in Illinois with Mr. Tracy leaving.
Yeah, so perhaps a bit of a surprise when he announced that he's stepping down. To me, what's really interesting about this is that he's not leaving because the Democrats are doing better or something like that. He's making it clear that this is about infighting within the Republican Party. Now, we know that on a national level, there is this MAGA force versus the more sort of maybe moderate or old-fashioned Republicans or conservative. Yeah. But that's just not what we're seeing. This dissension grow between them. And I think Tracy's departure is telling us it's the same issue at the state level. And so I guess he's looking and saying, I can't fix this. I don't know what to do about it with regard to this dissension. So I'm going to take myself out. There will be several people who will want to step in. But the highlight is, are the MAGA forces in the state really creating that much of a problem? We've seen other people, by the way, like Jim Durkin, former Minority House Leader, who also stepped down because he was just very frustrated with the kind of dissension which has been growing.
We'll see if they go more ultra-conservative now in that departure.
Well, that's right.
Let's talk about the conservative movement on the Supreme Court. As Jackie just told us here, they changed course on gun rights, allowing domestic violence survivors to have that protection. But at the same time, the court also overturned a ban on the bump stocks.
So we can go back to 2015. Look, this is a conservative court, as you guys have said, which is very protective of Second Amendment rights. So ever since 2015 in the Heller case that came from here, it was a Chicago case, in which the court affirms Second Amendment rights, and they took it another step. You can have a gun in your house to protect yourself. You can have a gun outside of your house to protect yourself. There was sort of no stopping this court as to where the protections were going to be until we get, including the bump stock case, by the way. But here's the distinction. First of all, regarding today's decision and the domestic abuse, even Chief Justice John Roberts, who wrote the opinion, he said, let's be clear about this. I'm not doing anything differently here. We're not changing course. Some people seem to be confused about how we reach our decisions. This is an originalist court. So basically what Chief Justice Roberts said is, look, you can go back to the very beginning of our country and you will find that even the founders believed it's okay to have restrictions to keep firearms out of the hands of deadly weapons, out of the hands of certain people who would not be trusted with them. So he takes it back to that time. This is not a shift, and he lets us know, not a shift in what's going on. The bump stock, the distinction I think that it's important to make, some would disagree with it, but they didn't make it a Second Amendment case. They dealt with it as a legislative case, basically saying, look, the legislation's not clear, a lot of disagreement about that, but legislation's not clear, and if Congress wants to fix this, Congress can fix it.
Has to.
Will Congress fix it? Lately, Republicans seem to be not wanting to address the issue, but it's not a Second Amendment case as the court dealt with it.
So much attention is being played on the decisions they have yet to make, including
There's only 15
Trump
of them yet to come.
immunity.
Yeah, I mean, 15 of them yet to come. Technically, one more week in the term. Yes, we are waiting for the Trump immunity case because that will determine so much. But that's not the only one that we're waiting for. There is an abortion case involving whether hospitals can perform emergency abortions for women. What about in a state where abortions are banned? But it's an emergency. How will the court read that? And January 6th obstruction case. The court could rule that certain allegations about obstruction are not appropriate for that kind of obstruction. Well, that would actually modify the case against former President Trump that's going on in D.C. Huge decisions. They always issue the big decisions at the end of the term. That's not a surprise. What's different here is, though, these are decisions that actually impact ongoing litigation. And when the Supreme Court understands they're dealing with ongoing litigation, like they did in Bush v. Gore, they understand the importance of moving things quickly. They're not doing this here. They're sitting on it. I tend to think it's political, and that's unfortunate.
The one and only, or the big debate that's happening between Trump and President Biden next week. What are the telltale signs you'll be wanting to hear from each candidate to assert that they're, capable of holding office?
Well, what's coming out now is interesting. We know Biden is going to be at Camp David preparing, and somebody, Ron Klain playing Trump and doing the traditional prep. The word from the Trump camp is he's not doing that. He's just getting policy updates. Is that true? Not true? I don't know. It is interesting that through the flip of a coin, President Biden won and said, I want to be on that side of the stage, to the right as we're watching. It's just where he was last time. But it was that, or do you want the first or last word in the debate?
Right.
We have not heard why it is that he opted for stage position over word. I would have probably taken give me the last word.
Trump
Maybe
gets
one
the
day
last word,
Trump gets the last word. Maybe we'll find out one day what was behind that decision. But you're also noticing right now Trump, who sort of says, Biden's a bumbler and a fumbler and he can't put two sentences together, now says he's a very fine debater. He's going to be tough. He's backing up on his strategy. I'm not sure what the public will think about that.
It's all fascinating. Quick word on the show.
Yeah, so Sunday morning, 9 o'clock on Political Report, I will have Alderman David Moore on in the 17th Ward. He'll be in his encampment where he is, telling us what he's doing to try and address the violence in the city. And then Evanston Mayor Daniel Biss will join me to talk about reparations. There is the first in the country program in Evanston. Chicago's trying to do something. We're going to find out from Mayor Biss what Chicago might take from the program going on in Evanston, which is under legal challenge, by the way.
It is.
That's your show, Paul. Thank you. And by the way, you can watch that CNN presidential debate simulcast right here on WGN next Thursday at 8 p.m. Paul, Micah, and I will have a recap and analysis in studio after the debate ends, so we hope you will tune in for that. Have a good weekend, Paul.
Thank you, too, guys.
All right, we'll see you soon.